Hard Hat's all about showing up to play hard, doing what it takes to win.
If you want to cement legacy, win another.
He's your third center.
You don't want to pump him up too much, but it's hard not to.
This is maybe the most I've ever agreed with you.
Hey, Bobby Manning here from Summer League. There's another edition of the Garden Report with Bobby Marks, ESPN's Cap Insider, and it's a perfect time to talk Cap, Boston Celtics, all the stuff they're doing here. So I really appreciate this, Bobby.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Good time to talk Celtics.
Yeah, and it's an interesting time. They've done a ton of work already, trading Porzingis, trading Drew Holiday, losing two free agents as it looks like they're going to between Luke Kornet and Al Horford here when he makes his decision. So they've cleared a ton of money off the books, but they're still pretty deep into the luxury tax. They're still an inch over the second apron. Yeah. So there's probably some more work for them to do here, right?
I do. I agree. I mean, I think, certainly we'll keep an eye on what happens with Anthony Simons, who's on that big expiring contract here. The good thing is that you have probably the next 5 months to figure out how to shed a little bit more money as far as getting under that second apron. I think that of course, is the ultimate priority, and I would expect Boston to be below that when the season ends next year. I think it's a matter of what is left of this roster when we get to next offseason. When you look at Jason Tatum coming back from that injury and still having Jaylen Brown and Derek White, and what's your flexibility looking like as far as to add around those three players? That's going to be the most important thing. I saw Brad Stevens' press conference the other day out here, and he said, this, don't use the word rebuild, right? Rebuild is kind of taboo, and I think it's hard getting top 25 type players. Tatum and Brown, and everybody needs a Derek White, as on your roster here, and to just gut it and then really build through the draft. You could be doing that for a long period of time here. So I am interested what Boston is going to do over the next few months here.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned Stevens over the last couple of weeks here. We've heard him say he didn't know how prohibitive the second apron would be until it stared him in the face. And I know Mike Zarin walked that back a little bit. And then the other thing that stood out to me is he said they made these trades because of the second apron. And we've been debating the last couple of days if we talked here. Second apron, luxury tax was obviously massive too, and their repeater tax team here. Is this the second apron tearing this team apart, or are there luxury tax considerations?
I think the way we work in this day and age is that your roster timeline is probably more shortened. Mm-hmm. I think that the luxury tax and the second apron kind of work hand in hand. I mean, you don't go into the second apron if you don't have high spending.
Yep.
I would say this. I would say if we didn't have a second apron and the punitive restrictions of adding outside of your own roster, you probably would see teams blowing through the luxury tax like we saw with Golden State and the Clips, and who knows what Boston would have done this year. Yeah, certainly the Tatum injury probably magnified everything as far as what direction you want to go in here. But I think there are ways to navigate around the second apron. I think, we saw Denver move Michael Porter Jr., and it cost them a future first, and they took back $17 million in less salary, and that dropped them significantly below, and the roster probably got better when you added Tim Hardaway Jr. and Bruce Brown and likely Jonas Valanciunas, and it gives you now the flexibility to extend Christian Brown and Peyton Watson. So there are ways to go about maneuvering around it. I do think, though, the day and age of a team staying together for 5 or 6 years probably doesn't exist anymore. But you could say that it probably didn't exist in the 90s, where you always had your core players, but you kind of changed it around them each year. Where teams get in trouble, where you really get in trouble, is when you have 3 players on 35% max contracts, and then you've already but you've traded for 1 or 2 of them, and you basically have given up all your draft picks.
Yep.
And then you don't have anything else except players on veteran minimum contracts. Or you have players, and then you're forced to re-sign them, and you keep on spending, and then basically you can't dig yourself out of a hole like, where Phoenix is right now, where they're basically probably will have to use like the Bradley Beal waive and stretch provision here. So I do think, as I said, it kind of shortens gives teams that trade for players, high salary players. You probably have like a 2-year window with that group. Boston did with, you traded for Drew and Porzingis in the summer of offseason of 23, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then that got you a championship, and then certainly you had the injury, and now you had to reassess as far as where your roster is.
So what's the outlook for them? Obviously, a ton of money comes off
Yeah.
the books after this year, getting back the expirings that they
Yeah.
did for Porzingis and Holiday. You're not going to be a team with cap space
Right.
here because of, Brown, Tatum, White, pretty significant deals there. That's a good core. I've tried to stress that even though they've lost a ton this offseason, it is pretty crazy how much talent they've lost in just one swoop here. You still have a pretty comparable core to maybe some of the other, best teams in the league here.
Yeah.
So what is the outlook for them? Obviously, there's going to be a bit of a gap here, but what's the outlook like going beyond this?
And you still have Peyton Pritchard, and you still have Sam Hauser, and you added a first-round pick in Hugo Gonzalez, and you're going to add another first-round pick next year. And I think we kind of get the cap space gets a little bit inflated and overused as far as what teams have to go out and spend. I do think you'll have your non-tax mid-level exception if that's something you want to use. That's roughly $15 million next year. The biggest thing is you now have the resources or the tools to go out and make trades.
Mm-hmm.
Like you were never allowed to go out and combine salaries before, aggregate. You were never allowed to take back more money in a trade. But when you go into next offseason, all those roster rules that you were restricted by, now all of a sudden those open up to you.
This show, as always, is powered by PrizePicks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. Turn your sports opinions into real cash with PrizePicks. With millions of members, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. All you have to do is pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. All you have to do is download that PrizePicks app, use the code CLNS to get $50 in your account when you play 5. That's it. All you have to do, play a $5 lineup, 50 instantly in your account when you use the code CLNS. You don't have to win. All you have to do is play 5, and that is that. Always check the PrizePicks app. There's free squares to be had all the time. Once again, all you have to do for new users is download that PrizePicks app, use the code CLNS, play 5, get 50 instantly in your account. Once again, download the app, play 5, get 50 instantly when you use the code CLNS. PrizePicks, run your game.
So that's the big thing I've wondered too, is how they're going to reshape the roster around these guys now. And they do have some tools, as you mentioned, mid-level next summer, probably some more trade flexibility. They don't have a ton of medium-sized contracts, though, and I think that's something they're going to have to figure out, or who's they're going to move out of this group. You got Sam Hauser at 10. Pritchard's going to be a guy a lot of teams probably love at 7, but that's not matching much salary coming back. So they're in an interesting trade spot, too, with all the medium-sized salaries that they've lost here. And talking to some people over the last, couple of days here, it seems like the center market, teams just feel like they can go out and get a center, even though the Celtics lost 3 pretty starting caliber guys over the last week here. So that's the question I think everyone has, is how they're going to fill that center position, how they're going to fill all the role positions around Tatum, Brown, and White.
Yeah, I mean, I think we call them the sweet spot contracts, right?
Yeah.
You have like that group of, you'd love to have like 8 guys between like $5 and $13 million, right? Like kind of what Indiana has with their depth. I think that's certainly a priority as far as how you go about doing it. Sometimes it's adding through the draft and then extending those players, and that's where
You got to hit the draft.
you have to hit the draft. Like I always said, like, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny about Oklahoma City and Orlando and teams like that. But what happens is with like Orlando, they got 4 players that are making $30 million plus with Ben Carroll, Wagner, Suggs, and Desmond Bane now. But they also have 5 or 6 players they've drafted in the last few years. So that's kind of like your reinforcement as far as like your next layer of players here. But yeah, it makes it priority as far as how you got to hit on your draft picks. If you don't, you're going to just be spinning the minimum market every year.
So this is the big question everyone's going to want to know, and I asked you it yesterday. Tatum, Brown, those are obviously 2 guys you want to keep together here. And there was some reporting this summer they took some calls, and teams were looking to see if they could pry Brown away from them, maybe White as well. Can you build a team now in this new CBA, in this new cap environment, with 2 35% guys like Tatum and Brown?
I think you can if those players are in their prime of their career and they're under 30 years old. I think it becomes more challenging when you add more of a seasoned player, like, if it was Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal, right? Like 2 players maybe towards the tail end of their career and are not playing at the 35% is kind of like that supermax number. If they're not at one can be, and maybe one isn't, but you need both. Like you need both at that high level here. I do think it's still manageable to do it, but it just makes such a priority as far as putting those other complementary players around them.
And what would you do in their position? Like, it's a grueling decision they're probably going to have to make at some point here, whether they want to keep Tatum, Brown, White together, or you try to break those guys up into multiple players, maybe some future draft picks. They're doing pretty well in their draft capital, I'll say. That's another thing you can say. Like, I know they gave up 29 for Holiday.
Yeah, but that's it.
They have a
and there's a
28
swap in there. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that gives you as I said, like, kind of, you're not, there's not 4 picks going out in the near future here. But it is a tough decision here, especially where Derek is, as far as getting up there a little bit with age, and as far as, do you want to split up contracts? Do you want to, who's your main guy to retool around? It's, as I said, roster building in this day and age is extremely hard. It takes a lot of creativity. It takes a lot of patience. Orlando did it for years where they just built their draft, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden you lose in the first round. 2 years in a row, like, nope, we need to go out and get Desmond Bane, and it's going to cost us 4 first-round picks, and what is left on a pretty good-sized number here. And that probably maybe shortened their window a little bit here as far as what you saw before. But it also gave them the opportunity to go out and try to compete for a championship in the Eastern Conference here. But I'm in the field where you're keeping your 2 core guys, just because I think they're, as I said, 2 top 20 players. I think Tatum's certainly a top 10 player. He gets back healthy for 26-27, and then you kind of just build around him.
And what's the next move for that? You mentioned Simons. I think that's been the thing you hear, is that you take Porzingis, or you take Holiday at 32, you turn him into Simons at 28. Does he turn into $14 million? Like, it's a bunch of steps to start to parse down your salary there. But I'm looking across the league, and the Brooklyn cap space dried up. Teams have done a lot of their work already. Is that something that they're going to be able to do this summer? Or is he a guy that they're probably going to have to bring into the season and maybe rebuild his value, or see where teams are at closer to the trade deadline? Because it doesn't seem like there's a lot cooking right there in terms of that move.
Yeah, I mean, Brooklyn's pretty interesting because they still have a little bit of cap space here. They still have to make a decision on Cam Thomas, who's a restricted free agent. They're roughly at their flexibility is range. They still haven't signed Daron Sharp or Zaire Williams. So if you look at it, and they've recently renounced both players, although they're going to re-sign them, they could be looking at $28 million in room. So is that enough to maybe, but what do you have to include, right? You're not going to trade a $28 million salary for nothing. Like, you're not attaching anything. And that's the decision the front office has to make as far as, is it worth attaching a draft asset? How much importance is it getting under the luxury tax?
Yep.
Right?
That's the big question.
That's
now.
right. And the luxury tax is not as taboo as it once was, because if you're in that 0 to 11 range, if you're just over, the penalties are really less restrictive as far as financially for you. The more you spend, the higher amount that you would owe in a penalty.
And they're about 19 over now.
Yeah, so you want to be like anything under 11. You don't get the distribution back, but anything under 11, I think that you're in a fine position.
Yeah, and they've said, Bill Chisholm, this new ownership group's willing to maintain some assets. They don't want to trade draft picks necessarily to get below the luxury tax line. I don't know, how important is avoiding that repeater tax thing, though? Because you get out for 2 years, and then you have your less punitive tax hits.
I do think the repeater tax is important, because it is the rules which have started this offseason as far as how they've basically upped the penalties for repeater tax teams is significant from a financial standpoint. And the more you spend, the higher tax bill that you have. Phoenix's tax bill, for example, is like $170 million because they're a repeater tax team. That's a lot of money.
I mean, the Celtics was like $250 to start this summer.
Yes, and because they were a repeater tax team, and you basically, every $3 million. It's easy way to look at it is every $3 million you would have spent would have cost you $25 million. So you keep on compounding that, and it eventually gets you to the number that we saw when projected to be in Boston.
He's Bobby Marks. Appreciate the info he's always bringing. Every move, you're putting out a video, you're putting out a new graphic where teams are standing on the cap sheet. So I appreciate the work you do, because obviously the Celtics are in a pretty important position with the tax now and the cap and all that. So thanks for joining us here today, and appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.